The grand gates of the Watson estate swung open slowly as Maria Alvarez clutched her worn leather bag. The sprawling mansion sat perched on a hill overlooking the city, its glass walls gleaming in the morning sun. At 58, Maria had cleaned many houses over the years, but nothing like this. She smoothed down her simple blue dress and took a deep breath. "You can do this," she whispered to herself in Spanish, a habit she never quite broke even after 30 years in this country. The job posting had seemed too good to be true, room and board included, healthcare benefits, and a salary that could finally help her bring her granddaughter over from Mexico. The only catch? The homeowner was Elaine Watson, the notoriously demanding CEO of Watson Tech, whose face regularly appeared on business magazines. As Maria approached the massive front door, it opened before she could knock. A thin woman with sharp features and perfectly styled blonde hair stood in the doorway, phone pressed to her ear. "The Singapore deal closes tonight or we walk," Elaine Watson barked into the phone, then glanced at Maria. "You're the new housekeeper, come in. I've got back-to-back calls for another hour." Maria nodded and stepped inside, her eyes widening at the soaring ceilings and artwork that probably cost more than she'd earned in her lifetime. "Shoes off. House rules." Elaine pointed to a rack by the door, still focused on her call. "Kitchen's that way. Your quarters are in the east wing. Helen will show you around when she gets here." With that, Elaine Watson strode away, her voice echoing through the massive space as she continued her business call. Maria carefully removed her shoes and waited quietly in the entryway, not daring to explore without permission. 10 minutes later, a friendly-faced woman in her 60s appeared. "You must be Maria. I'm Helen, the house manager," she said warmly. "Don't mind Ms. Watson, she's always like that. Come on, I'll show you around." As they walked through the seemingly endless rooms, each more beautiful than the last, Helen explained the daily routines, cleaning schedules, and Ms. Watson's many particular preferences. "The most important thing," Helen said, lowering her voice, "is Oliver, Ms. Watson's son. He's 9 and has autism, nonverbal mostly. There's a team of therapists and tutors who come in, but you'll need to clean around their sessions, and be careful not to disrupt his routines." Maria nodded solemnly. "I understand. My neighbor's child back home was similar. Oliver has his own wing. We'll go there last," Helen explained. "Ms. Watson is very protective of him." After touring the kitchen, formal dining room, 3 living areas, home gym, indoor pool, and Elaine's office spaces, they finally reached Maria's quarters, a cozy apartment-like space with its own bathroom and small sitting area. "This is lovely," Maria said genuinely, setting her bag down on the bed. "You can unpack later. Let's meet Oliver now, while he's with Dr. Patel. It's good for him to see new faces with someone he trusts nearby." They walked to the opposite side of the house, where the atmosphere changed noticeably. The stark modern design gave way to softer colors and rounded edges. Helen knocked gently on a door marked with a blue star. Inside, a young Indian woman sat at a table across from a small boy with dark curly hair. He was staring intensely at a tablet screen, completely ignoring the flashcards the woman kept trying to show him. "Dr. Patel, this is Maria, our new housekeeper," Helen said softly. The woman looked up and nodded with a tight smile. "Oliver, can you say hello to Maria?" she prompted. The boy didn't look up or acknowledge anyone's presence. His fingers moved rapidly across the tablet screen, which showed what looked like a puzzle game. "He's having a difficult day," Dr. Patel explained. "Maybe introductions another time." Maria nodded but found herself watching the boy closely. There was something in the intensity of his focus that reminded her of her late husband, who could fix any broken radio without ever looking at a manual. "I'll come back later to clean," Maria whispered, but as they turned to leave, she noticed the boy's head tilt slightly toward her, though his eyes remained fixed on the tablet. Over the next few days, Maria learned the rhythms of the Watson household. Elaine was rarely home, often leaving before dawn and returning after Oliver was asleep. A parade of specialists came and went throughout the day: speech therapists, behavioral therapists, tutors, and doctors. They all carried fancy degrees and spoke about Oliver in complex terms that Maria didn't always understand. What she did understand was that none of them seemed to connect with him. One morning during her 3rd week, Maria was dusting the bookshelves in Oliver's playroom while he sat in his usual spot by the window, arranging and rearranging a collection of small wooden blocks. The therapist had stepped out to take a phone call, leaving them alone. Maria hummed softly as she worked, an old lullaby her grandmother had sung to her. She didn't notice at first when the rhythmic clicking of the blocks stopped. When she turned around, Oliver was watching her, his gaze not quite meeting hers but definitely in her direction. "Do you like music, Niño?" she asked softly in Spanish, not expecting a response. Oliver's fingers twitched, and for a brief moment, his eyes flickered to her face before darting away. The next day, Maria brought her small radio with her. While cleaning Oliver's bathroom, she played a Spanish-language station quietly. When she came out, she found Oliver standing in the doorway, head tilted as if listening. "This song is about a bird who cannot find his way home," she explained in Spanish, not talking down to him as she'd seen others do. But then he realizes home is wherever his heart feels peace. Oliver's face remained expressionless, but he didn't leave. This became their routine. Maria would work, sometimes talking or singing in Spanish, sometimes playing her radio. Oliver never responded directly, but she noticed he seemed more relaxed on the days when she worked in his wing. One afternoon, while listening to a Portuguese cooking show on her radio, Maria had been trying to learn some Portuguese to speak with the new family who moved in next to her sister back home. She noticed Oliver sitting unusually close to where she was mopping. In Portuguese, this is called bacalhau, she said, pointing to the radio where the host was describing a salt cod dish. In Spanish, we say bacalhau, not so different, yes? For the first time, Oliver looked directly at her face for a full second before returning to his tablet. That evening, when Elaine returned home, Maria decided to mention it. "Ms. Watson, I hope you don't mind, but Oliver seems to enjoy when I play my radio while cleaning." Elaine looked up from her papers with a frown. "What radio?" "His sensory processing is very delicate. Dr. Brenner specifically said." "I'm sorry, I didn't know." Maria backpedaled quickly. "It's very quiet, and he actually comes closer when it's on, especially when it's in different languages." Elaine's frown deepened. Different languages overwhelm him. His primary speech therapist has been working on basic English communication for 3 years with minimal progress. "Of course, I won't do it again," Maria promised, though something inside her doubted the expert's assessment. That night, Maria couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about the boy's reaction to the languages. On a hunch, she dug through her bag and found the small language learning book she'd bought years ago, but never had time to use. It had basic phrases in several languages with pronunciation guides. The next day, while the regular Tuesday therapist was running late, Maria quietly approached Oliver, who was lining up colored pencils in a perfect rainbow. "Oliver," she said softly. "In Italian, blue is blue. In French, it's bleu." She pointed to the blue pencil. "In Spanish, it's azul." Oliver's hand froze over the pencils. "Green is verde in both Spanish and Italian. But in French, it's vert," she continued. Slowly, deliberately, Oliver pushed the green pencil toward her. Maria's heart raced. She picked it up and said, "Verde," in Spanish. Oliver blinked twice, then pushed the red pencil toward her. "Rojo," she said in Spanish. Then added rosso in Italian, rouge in French. For nearly 10 minutes they continued this game until the therapist arrived and Maria had to return to her cleaning duties. But something had shifted. She had seen recognition in his eyes, not confusion, but interest. Over the following weeks, Maria began leaving her language books where Oliver could find them. She noticed them moving around his room, though whenever anyone else was present, he showed no interest in them. Then came the morning that changed everything. Maria was changing the sheets in Oliver's room while he was at his swimming lesson with the physical therapist. As she lifted the pillow, a folded piece of paper fell out. Curious, she opened it. In careful, childlike handwriting were lists of words, colors and numbers in English, Spanish, Portuguese, and what looked like beginnings of French. At the bottom of the page was a note. "Gracias, Maria." Maria sat heavily on the bed, her hand trembling as she held the paper. Oliver had not only been listening, he had been learning, and more importantly, he had found a way to say thank you. When she heard the therapy session ending down the hall, Maria quickly tucked the paper back under the pillow. She would need to be careful about how to proceed. Elaine Watson was fiercely protective of her son and dismissive of approaches that didn't come with academic credentials. But Maria had seen something in Oliver that all the expensive specialists had missed. The boy who supposedly couldn't learn language was secretly teaching himself multiple languages at once. T. Key had been so simple. He needed different pathways, different sounds, different patterns. As she finished making the bed, Maria made a decision. She would find a way to help this boy, even if she had to do it in secret. After all, what good were the 9 languages she'd picked up throughout her own journey if she couldn't share them with someone who understood their beauty? When Oliver returned to his room later, Maria smiled at him and whispered, "De nada, you're welcome." And for the first time since she'd arrived at the Watson estate, Oliver smiled back. Over the next few weeks, Maria and Oliver developed a secret language routine. Every morning before the parade of therapists arrived, Maria would slip into Oliver's room with breakfast and a new word or phrase in a different language. The boy never spoke aloud, but his eyes lit up in a way they never did during his regular therapy sessions. Maria began leaving small notes hidden around Oliver's room. Simple words in Spanish, Portuguese, Italian, and French tucked inside his toy chest or under his breakfast plate. To her delight, she would find responses written in Oliver's careful handwriting, sometimes with questions about pronunciation or grammar, that showed a depth of understanding that amazed her. One rainy Tuesday, Maria was folding laundry in Oliver's room while he worked with his speech therapist, Dr. Walsh, a stern woman with thick glasses and a clipboard permanently attached to her hand. "Oliver, look at the picture." "What is this?" Dr. Walsh pointed to a flashcard showing an apple. "Apple, can you say apple?" Oliver stared blankly at the wall behind her, his fingers tapping a rhythm on his knee. "Let's try again." "Apple," the therapist enunciated slowly, leaning forward. "We've been working on this for months, Oliver. I know you can do it." From the corner where she quietly folded clothes, Maria noticed Oliver's eyes briefly flick toward the language book peeking out from beneath his pillow. Their shared secret. After 20 more minutes of failed attempts to get Oliver to repeat basic English words, Dr. Walsh sighed heavily, made some notes on her clipboard, and packed up. "Any progress?" Maria asked innocently as she walked the therapist to the door. "I'm afraid not. He's extremely resistant today," Dr. Walsh replied. "His mother is expecting results, but..." She shook her head. "Sometimes I wonder if we're using the right approach." The moment the front door closed, Maria hurried back to Oliver's room. The boy was sitting exactly where they'd left him, but now he was holding the language book, flipping through it with intent. "Oliver," Maria said softly in Spanish, "would you like to learn more today?" He looked up, not quite meeting her eyes, but definitely acknowledging her presence. Then, to her amazement, he walked to his desk, pulled out a sheet of paper and handed it to her. Written neatly in columns were dozens of words. Apple, banana, water, bread, each translated into Spanish, Portuguese, Italian, and French. At the bottom of the page was a question written in careful letters. Japanese. Maria gasped, her hand trembling as she held the paper. "You want to learn Japanese too?" Oliver nodded once, the movement so subtle she almost missed it. I don't know Japanese," Maria admitted, "but I can find someone who does." That evening, after Oliver had gone to bed and Elaine was locked in her home office with another late-night business call, Maria called her nephew Miguel, who was studying linguistics at the State University. "Aunt Maria, Japanese is completely different from European languages," Miguel explained after hearing her request. "It has different writing systems and grammar. Are you sure this kid can handle it?" "He's different," Maria insisted. "He sees patterns I don't think we understand." The next day, Miguel sent her an audio file and some basic Japanese phrases with their translations. Maria loaded them onto an old MP3 player she bought at a thrift store and secretly gave it to Oliver. 2 days later, Oliver slipped her a note with perfectly written Japanese characters alongside their English meanings. Maria stared in disbelief. She'd heard of people with extraordinary language abilities, but seeing it unfold before her eyes was something else entirely. As weeks passed, their secret language exchange deepened. Oliver began leaving complex sentences under Maria's cleaning supplies, thoughts and observations written in rotating languages. Through these notes, Maria began to truly know the boy who rarely spoke aloud. The blue light from Mom's computer makes shadows dance on the ceiling at night, he wrote in Spanish one day. Dr. Walsh smells like lemons and disappointment appeared in French. Another morning. I can hear colors when different languages are spoken. Spanish is red, French is blue, Italian is green, Portuguese is orange, he explained in perfectly constructed Portuguese. Maria carefully saved every note, amazed by both his linguistic abilities and the window they provided into his unique mind. She began to understand that Oliver wasn't broken. He simply experienced the world differently. One afternoon, while Elaine was away at a conference in Tokyo, Maria decided to take a risk. Rather than cleaning around Oliver's session with Dr. Patel, his occupational therapist, she lingered in the room, dusting shelves slowly as she listened to their interaction. "Oliver, we need to work on making eye contact," Dr. Patel was saying, holding up a reward chart with stickers. "Remember, looking at people shows you're listening." Oliver remained focused on his tablet. Ignoring both the therapist and the colorful stickers meant to motivate him. After 15 minutes of failed attempts, Maria cleared her throat. "Dr. Patel, may I try something?" The therapist looked surprised but nodded cautiously. Maria knelt in front of Oliver and said softly in Spanish, "Oliver, can you show Dr. Patel how many languages you know?" For a moment, nothing happened. Then slowly, Oliver looked up, his eyes meeting Dr. Patel's for the first time ever. He reached for a piece of paper on his desk and wrote quickly before handing it to the stunned therapist. On the paper was a greeting in 7 different languages, each perfectly written. Dr. Patel's eyes widened. "Did you help him write this?" she asked Maria. "No," Maria said. "He taught himself. Through patterns and connections I think only he can see." That's not possible," Dr. Patel whispered. "He barely responds to simple English commands." Maria smiled gently. "Maybe we've been asking the wrong questions in the wrong languages." That evening, Dr. Patel stayed late, working with Oliver through various language exercises Maria suggested. For the first time, they saw him fully engaged, responding through writing and occasional nods. When asked direct questions in different languages, he would respond appropriately by pointing or writing answers. "This is remarkable," Dr. Patel said as they wrapped up the session. "It's like he's been locked in a room where everyone was speaking a language he couldn't process, and suddenly we found the key." "What will you tell Ms. Watson?" Maria asked nervously. Dr. Patel hesitated. "I need to consult with the other specialists first. This challenges everything in our treatment plan. And Elaine, well, she has very specific expectations for Oliver's therapy." Later that night, after Dr. Patel had gone, Maria sat with Oliver in the window seat of his room, looking out at the garden illuminated by moonlight. "You've been keeping secrets," she said gently in Spanish. "Big, wonderful secrets." Oliver handed her a note written in his now familiar script. "They wouldn't understand. They think in straight lines. I think in stars." Maria smiled, understanding completely what he meant. "Your mother will need to know eventually," he wrote quickly. "Not yet. She'll make it into a project." Everything becomes a project with charts and goals and timelines. The wisdom in his words stunned her. This 9-year-old boy understood his mother in ways even she probably didn't realize. "Your gift is special, Oliver," Maria said, "but more important is what you want to do with it." He considered this, then wrote, "I want to speak in all the languages." But the words get stuck. For the first time, Maria fully understood the frustration that must live inside him, to understand so many languages but struggle to produce the sounds. "Then we will find a way," she promised. The next morning, Maria arrived early to start her cleaning duties and found Elaine unexpectedly home, sitting at the kitchen island with coffee and her ever-present laptop. "Good morning, Ms. Watson," Maria said, surprised. "I thought you were in Tokyo until Friday." "Closed the deal early," Elaine replied without looking up from her screen. "How are things here?" "Any issues with Oliver?" Maria hesitated, her heart pounding. This was her chance to reveal what she knew. But she remembered Oliver's note about his mother turning everything into a project with timelines and goals. "He's been very calm this week," she said carefully. "I think he enjoys his routine." Elaine nodded absently. "Good. Dr. Walsh left me a message about trying some new approach. I swear every month it's something new with these specialists and nothing ever changes. Sometimes change happens slowly," Maria offered, "or in ways we don't immediately recognize." This made Elaine look up, studying Maria's face with sudden interest. "You seem to spend a lot of time with him. Has he shown you anything unusual?" The question hung in the air between them. Maria thought of the dozens of notes hidden in her quarters, the remarkable progress, the trust Oliver had placed in her. She thought of how Elaine might react, with disbelief, with takeover, with a new battalion of specialists analyzing and charting every word Oliver wrote. "He's a very special boy," Maria said finally. "I think he understands more than people realize." Elaine's face softened for a moment, vulnerability replacing her usual sharp focus. "Sometimes I wonder if I'm doing the right things for him. All these therapies, specialists, protocols, and he still won't look at me or speak to me." "Have you tried?" Maria began, then stopped herself. "Tried what?" Elaine asked. "Nothing. It's not my place," Maria said quickly. "Please, I want to know," Elaine insisted, surprising them both with the gentleness in her voice. Maria took a deep breath. "Have you tried just sitting with him? Not asking for anything, not trying to teach anything, just being there? Maybe talking about your day in a normal voice like you would with anyone else?" Elaine stared at her, then slowly set down her coffee cup. "You think I don't spend time with my own son? I think you love him very much and want the best for him," Maria said carefully. "But sometimes the best experts can miss the simplest things." Before Elaine could respond, they heard a crash from upstairs, followed by the unmistakable sound of breaking glass. Both women rushed toward Oliver's room. They found him standing beside his desk, a shattered picture frame at his feet. It had held a photo of Elaine holding baby Oliver. He was staring at the broken glass, his body rigid. "It's okay, Oliver," Elaine said immediately, stepping forward. "Don't move, there's glass everywhere!" But Oliver wasn't having a meltdown as they might have expected. Instead, he was frantically writing something on a piece of paper, his movements urgent. Maria held her breath as Oliver finished writing and thrust the paper toward his mother. Elaine took it, her hands trembling slightly as she read. Her eyes widened, then filled with tears. "What does it say?" Maria whispered. Elaine looked up, her face a mixture of shock and wonder. "It says, 'I can understand you, Mom. I always could. I just couldn't find the words.'" She looked back at her son, really seeing him perhaps for the first time. "And it's written in perfect Japanese, the language I speak when I make my business calls to Tokyo." The room fell silent after Elaine read Oliver's note. She stood frozen, the paper trembling in her hands, while Oliver watched her with an intensity he'd never shown before. Maria held her breath, uncertain whether she was witnessing a breakthrough or the calm before a storm. "How long?" Elaine finally whispered, looking between her son and the housekeeper. "How long has he been able to do this?" Maria stepped forward carefully. "He's been writing notes for a few weeks now. At first just single words, then sentences. But he understands much more than he expresses." Elaine knelt down, mindful of the broken glass, and looked directly at her son. "Oliver, can you understand everything I say to you? Have you always understood?" Oliver reached for another piece of paper and wrote quickly, his handwriting neat despite his obvious excitement. He handed it to his mother. "Yes, words come in but get tangled going out," Elaine read aloud, her voice breaking. She looked up at Maria. "How did you know? All these specialists, all these years, all this money, and you figured it out in weeks," Maria shook her head. "I didn't do anything special. I just spoke to him in different languages while I worked. He seemed interested, so I continued. The languages gave him a different path to expression. But Japanese, I only use it for my Tokyo business calls." Elaine stared at her son with new eyes. "You've been listening to my work calls?" Oliver wrote again, faster this time. "From the air vents. The sound travels to my room. Japanese sounds like silver bells." A tear slipped down Elaine's cheek. "And you taught yourself from just listening to my calls?" Oliver nodded, then wrote, "I need to hear a language 3 times to understand its patterns, 5 times to read it, 7 times to write it." Elaine's jaw dropped. She looked at Maria, who seemed equally amazed by this revelation. "What other languages can you understand, sweetheart?" Elaine asked, her voice gentle in a way Maria had never heard before. Oliver held up 7 fingers, then wrote a list: Spanish, Portuguese, Italian, French, German, Japanese, and the beginnings of Mandarin. 7 languages, Elaine whispered. "My God," Maria cleared her throat. "I believe he has what they call a hyper-polyglot brain. My nephew studies linguistics at the university. He's told me about people who can acquire languages at extraordinary speeds." Elaine was about to respond when Dr. Walsh, the speech therapist, knocked on the open door. "I'm sorry I'm a bit early today." She stopped, taking in the scene. The broken glass, Elaine kneeling on the floor, the papers covered in multiple languages. Is everything all right? Elaine stood up, wiping away her tears. Cancel today's session, Dr. Walsh. In fact, clear Oliver's schedule for the rest of the week. We need to reevaluate everything. The therapist blinked in surprise. Ms. Watson, consistency is crucial for... My son understands 7 languages, Elaine interrupted, her CEO voice returning. He's been teaching himself by listening and observing while we've been drilling him on basic English vocabulary for years. I think that warrants a new approach, don't you? Dr. Walsh's mouth opened and closed several times before she managed to say, That's not possible. His assessments clearly indicate Oliver suddenly made a sound. Not quite a word, but definitely intentional. Everyone turned to look at him. He was standing taller now, his eyes bright with purpose. He took a deep breath and pushed a sound out. Hello. The word was slightly slurred but unmistakable. It hung in the air like something precious and fragile. Elaine covered her mouth with her hand. Oliver, bonjour, he said next, the French greeting flowing more easily than the English one. Hola, ciao, hola, konnichiwa, ni hao. Each greeting came out more confidently than the last, as if languages other than English somehow bypassed whatever blockage existed in his mind. Dr. Walsh sank into a chair, her clipboard forgotten. This changes everything we thought we understood about his condition. Over the next few days, the Watson house transformed. Elaine cleared her calendar of all non-essential meetings, something her assistant said had never happened before, and dove into understanding her son's remarkable abilities. The parade of specialists was temporarily halted, replaced by careful observation, and a new approach led by Oliver himself. Maria found herself unexpectedly promoted from housekeeper to key advisor, invited into meetings where Elaine asked her endless questions about how she'd discovered Oliver's gift. I just talked to him like a person, Maria explained over coffee one morning, still uncomfortable sitting at the kitchen island with her employer like equals, not like someone broken who needed fixing. Elaine winced at that but nodded. I've spent years trying to give him the best help money could buy. I never considered that all those experts might be taking the wrong approach entirely. Oliver flourished under the new attention. Though his spoken words remained few and often required great effort, his written communication blossomed. He began carrying a tablet where he could type quickly in any language he chose, the device reading his words aloud in whatever voice and language he selected. One evening, about 2 weeks after the breakthrough, Oliver typed something and showed it to his mother. I want to talk to the people who make the lights dance on the ceiling. Elaine read, looking confused. Maria smiled. I think he means the programmers at your company. He mentioned once that he can see the code from your computer reflecting on his ceiling through the air vents. Elaine's eyebrows shot up. You want to see Watson Tech's programming team, Oliver? He nodded enthusiastically and typed. The light patterns have their own language too. The next day, Oliver visited his mother's company headquarters for the first time. The employees had been briefed about the CEO's son and his special communication needs, but nothing could have prepared them for what happened in the programming department. Oliver walked straight to a giant screen displaying lines of code for a new artificial intelligence project. He stared at it, transfixed, then began typing rapidly on his tablet. There's a mistake on line 437, the tablet's voice announced to the room. The algorithm will create a logic loop when processing natural language. The lead programmer, a young man with wild hair and wilder eyes, rushed to check. After a moment of scrolling and reading, he looked up in shock. He's right. How did he see that? It took our team weeks to even get this far. Oliver typed again. Your code has an accent. Like how Spanish and Portuguese are similar but different. I can see where the accent creates problems. By the end of the day, Oliver had helped the programming team identify 3 critical errors in their code and suggested an elegant solution for a problem they'd been struggling with for months. The team was awestruck, watching this 9-year-old boy process complex programming languages as easily as he did human ones. On the drive home, Elaine was quiet, processing everything she'd witnessed. Your mind is extraordinary, Oliver, she finally said. I wish I'd understood sooner. Oliver typed. You couldn't hear me before because I was speaking in colors and patterns. Now I have words to match them. Maria watched from the back seat as Elaine reached over to squeeze her son's hand. a gesture that would have overwhelmed him weeks ago but now brought a small smile to his face. That night, after Oliver had gone to bed, Elaine asked Maria to join her in her home office, a space where no staff was typically allowed. The room was dominated by a desk with 3 large monitors and walls covered in awards and business magazine covers, featuring Elaine's face. "I owe you an apology," Elaine said, pouring 2 glasses of wine and handing one to Maria. "And my deepest gratitude." Maria shook her head. "I only did what felt right." "You saw my son when I couldn't," Elaine replied. "I was so focused on fixing what I thought was broken that I missed the gift right in front of me." She took a long sip of her wine. Watson Tech has been developing an adaptive learning platform for children with special needs. We've been approaching it all wrong. Maria listened as Elaine outlined a new vision, a platform that would identify children's unique strengths rather than focusing on their challenges, using Oliver's experience as a model. "I'd like you to be part of this," Elaine said finally, "not as my housekeeper, but as a consultant. You have an insight that all my experts lacked." Maria blinked in surprise. "I don't have degrees or training. You're the woman who unlocked my son's world," Elaine interrupted. "That's qualification enough." The next morning, Oliver came to breakfast carrying a stack of papers. He handed them to his mother and Maria, his eyes bright with excitement. "What's this, sweetheart?" Elaine asked, looking through the pages covered in careful handwriting. "It's Russian," Maria realized, recognizing some of the Cyrillic letters from her Eastern European neighbors. "He's teaching himself Russian now." Oliver nodded and typed on his tablet. 8 languages now. "Russian sounds like deep water moving. I want to learn Arabic next. It looks like dancing." Elaine laughed, a sound that had rarely been heard in the house before. "Slow down, Oliver. Let's master speaking a few of these languages first." Oliver's face grew serious as he typed. "I don't need to speak them all. Different languages let me think different thoughts. English is straight lines, Spanish curves, Japanese is layers. In Russian, I can think thoughts I can't think in English." Maria and Elaine exchanged looks of wonder. This wasn't just about communication. Oliver was experiencing languages as different pathways for thought itself. Later that day, Dr. Patel returned for a modified session, bringing along a colleague who specialized in neurodiversity and language acquisition. What Oliver is describing matches recent research on how polyglots experience languages, the specialist explained after meeting with him. Different languages activate different neural pathways. For someone with Oliver's unique neurology, these alternate pathways may bypass the processing challenges he experiences in his native language. "So I wasn't imagining it," Maria said. "The languages really do give him different ways to think." "Exactly," the specialist confirmed. "And his ability to acquire languages at this speed suggests extraordinary pattern recognition abilities. I'd like to explore this further with your permission." Elaine looked at Oliver, who was typing rapidly on his tablet.
He showed the screen to his mother. "I want to learn."
"But no more fixing. Just understanding," Elaine read aloud. She nodded at the specialist. "Those are our terms. We study his abilities, but we stop trying to make him conform to neurotypical standards." The specialist smiled. "That's exactly the approach I advocate for. Working with strengths rather than focusing solely on challenges." As the adults continued discussing plans, Oliver slipped away to sit by the window, tablet in hand. Maria joined him a moment later. "You've changed everything," she said softly in Spanish. "Your mother, these doctors, even me." Oliver typed, "You were the first person who didn't try to pull me into your world. You found a bridge to mine instead." Maria felt tears prick her eyes. "What happens next is up to you, Niño. What do you want to do with all these languages in your head?" His answer appeared on the screen, simple but profound. "Build more bridges." 3 months after Oliver's breakthrough, the Watson household had transformed completely. The clinical atmosphere had given way to a vibrant, multilingual learning environment. The walls of Oliver's wing, once stark white, now displayed colorful maps, alphabets from around the world, and pages of his own writings in various languages. Elaine had converted one of the mansion's rarely used sitting rooms into a specialized language lab, equipped with the latest technology to support Oliver's unique learning style. Maria, no longer just a housekeeper, now held the official title of Language and Cultural Specialist at both the Watson home and Watson Tech's new educational division. On this particular morning, Oliver sat cross-legged on a cushion in the language lab, his eyes closed in concentration as an audio recording played Russian folktales. At 10 years old, he was still small for his age, but there was a new confidence in his posture that hadn't existed before. Maria watched from the doorway, marveling at how far he had come. Though speech remained challenging for him, particularly in English, he could now speak short sentences in several languages, each with varying degrees of fluency. Russian had become his 8th language, and he was making remarkable progress with Arabic, his 9th. "How's he doing?" Elaine whispered, appearing beside Maria with 2 cups of coffee. She handed one to Maria, another sign of how their relationship had evolved from employer and employee to something closer to partners. "He's been listening to that same story for an hour," Maria replied, accepting the coffee gratefully. "He says Russian consonants are like stepping stones across a river." Elaine smiled. "His metaphors for language always amaze me. Yesterday he told me German feels like building with blocks, while French is like water flowing around rocks." The recording ended, and Oliver opened his eyes. He spotted them in the doorway and waved them in, reaching for his tablet. "I understood 87% of the story this time," the tablet's voice announced as he typed. "The grammar patterns are becoming clearer." "That's wonderful, sweetheart," Elaine said, sitting beside him. "Dr. Lin will be here at 11 to discuss your progress with Arabic script." Oliver nodded, then typed again. "I had the dream again last night. The one with the children who can't find their words." Maria and Elaine exchanged glances. For the past few weeks, Oliver had been describing a recurring dream about children trapped behind walls of fog, unable to communicate with the people around them. "Do you want to tell us more about it?" Maria asked gently. Oliver's fingers moved rapidly across the screen. "They're like me, but they don't have a Maria or a bridge to cross. They have thoughts but no way to share them. People think they're empty, but they're full of ideas and feelings." Elaine took her son's hand. "You're thinking about other children with autism?" He nodded emphatically and continued typing. "The methods you use at Watson Tech aren't right yet. You're still thinking in straight lines. These children think in spirals and stars and colors." Since Oliver's breakthrough, Elaine had been pouring resources into developing educational tools for children with communication challenges. A team of programmers and educators had been working for months on a prototype platform, with Oliver providing regular feedback. "What needs to change?" Elaine asked, pulling out her phone to take notes. Always the CEO, even with her son. Oliver thought for a moment, then typed, "You need to start with patterns, not words. Show them that communication can happen in many ways. Let them find their own bridges." Later that day, Oliver had his weekly video call with Dr. Chen, a neurolinguist from Singapore who had been studying his unique language acquisition patterns. These sessions had become a highlight of Oliver's week, an opportunity to discuss his experiences with someone who understood the science behind them. "Your progress with Arabic is extraordinary," Dr. Chen said, examining the writing samples Oliver had sent. "Most language learners struggle with the transition to a non-Latin script, but you seem to absorb it intuitively." Oliver typed his response. "Arabic letters feel like dancing. Each one changes shape depending on its neighbors, like people who behave differently in different groups." Dr. Chen smiled. "That's a beautiful way to describe it. I'm particularly interested in how you process tonal languages like Mandarin compared to non-tonal languages. Can you tell me more about that?" As Oliver launched into a detailed explanation, comparing Mandarin tones to musical notes, Maria slipped out of the room to give them privacy. She found Elaine in her home office, surrounded by screens displaying code and educational graphics. The programming team sent over the new prototype, Elaine explained without looking up. They've incorporated Oliver's feedback about pattern recognition, but something still isn't clicking. Maria peered at the screens. "It looks very technical." "That's the problem," Elaine sighed, pushing back from her desk. "We keep approaching this from an adult neurotypical perspective. We need to see it through Oliver's eyes." She rubbed her temples. "He's trying to tell us something important with these dreams he keeps having, but I'm not sure I understand what." That evening, during dinner, Oliver suddenly set down his fork and reached for his tablet. He typed frantically, his eyes bright with excitement. "I know what's wrong with the program," the tablet announced. "You're using words as the foundation. Words come later. First comes patterns, rhythms, music, colors. That's the universal language. Elaine looked up from her plate. You want us to start with music and visual patterns instead of vocabulary? Oliver nodded vigorously, then typed, The bridge I crossed wasn't made of words. It was made of sounds and colors that became patterns that became languages. Like how you describe Spanish as red and French as blue? Maria asked Remem. Bearing one of his earlier notes, yes, Oliver typed. Each language has its own color and texture and rhythm in my mind. That's how I separate and organize them. Elaine was quiet for a moment, processing this information. So we need to create a system that begins with sensory patterns, sounds, colors, movements, and gradually builds toward language through those associations. Oliver's face lit up with a rare full smile. He typed, Yes, and I want to help make it. I want to be the bridge for other children. The next morning, Elaine called an emergency meeting with her development team. The conference room at Watson Tech headquarters filled with programmers, educators, and neuroscience specialists, all curious about the sudden change in direction. To everyone's surprise, Oliver insisted on attending. Though large gatherings usually overwhelmed him, he seemed determined to communicate his vision directly. He sat between his mother and Maria, tablet in hand, occasionally fidgeting but remarkably focused. My son has identified a fundamental flaw in our approach, Elaine began, standing at the head of the table. We've been building a language acquisition tool, but language isn't the starting point for many of these children. Oliver, would you like to explain? All eyes turned to the small boy, who took a deep breath and pressed a button on his tablet. Instead of the usual text-to-speech function, a presentation appeared on the main screen, one he had created himself overnight. The presentation began with swirling patterns of color that gradually transformed into shapes, then symbols, then letters from various alphabets. As the visuals played, music with subtly changing rhythms accompanied them, creating a multi-sensory experience that left the room in stunned silence. After 2 minutes, the presentation ended and Oliver typed, That's how I see language. Not as words, but as patterns that create meaning. Each color, each sound is part of a larger system. One of the programmers raised his hand. Are you suggesting we create a program that maps languages to sensory experiences? Colors, sounds, textures. Oliver nodded enthusiastically and typed, Different for each person. The program needs to learn how each child sees patterns, then build bridges based on their map, not yours. That's revolutionary, the lead educator said slowly. Instead of imposing our communication framework, we create tools that discover and work within each child's unique cognitive landscape. Exactly, Elaine said, unable to hide the pride in her voice. And Oliver has already begun mapping out how this might work. Over the next several hours, Oliver shared his ideas through a combination of typing, drawing, and occasionally speaking simple phrases in various languages. The team watched in amazement as this 10-year-old boy challenged their fundamental assumptions about language, communication, and learning. By late afternoon, the whiteboard walls were covered with notes, diagrams, and code snippets. The exhausted but energized team had the beginnings of a completely new approach, one that treated communication not as a skill to be taught, but as a connection to be discovered. As they were wrapping up, the company's chief financial officer poked his head into the room. Elaine, the investors are getting nervous about the timeline. They were expecting a prototype demonstration next month. Elaine straightened her shoulders. Tell them we've had a breakthrough that changes everything. We're not just creating another educational app. We're developing a new paradigm for understanding neurodiversity. That's a hard sell without concrete results, the CFO warned. Oliver, who had been quietly listening, suddenly stood up. He walked to the front of the room, tablet in hand, and faced the group of adults. He took several deep breaths, focusing intensely, then set his tablet down. I will show them, he said aloud in English, each word requiring visible effort but emerging clearly. My words were locked, not gone. The room fell silent. It was the longest English sentence he had spoken aloud, and he had chosen to do it in front of a room full of people, something that would have been unimaginable just months ago. Maria felt tears welling in her eyes. Elaine was frozen in place, one hand covering her mouth. Oliver picked up his tablet again and typed, There are millions of children whose words are locked away. I can help find the keys. The CFO, visibly moved, nodded slowly. I'll buy you whatever time you need. Later that evening, As Maria helped Oliver prepare for bed, she noticed he seemed unusually quiet, even for him. "You did something amazing today," she said in Spanish, their original bridge language. "You should be proud." He nodded, but his expression remained serious as he typed, "The program will help, but it's not enough." "What do you mean?" Maria asked. "The children in my dreams need more than software," he typed. "They need people who see them. Really see them. Like you saw me." Maria sat on the edge of his bed, understanding dawning on her face. "You want to create a training program for people, not just software for children." He nodded vigorously and typed, "Teachers, parents, doctors need to learn how to find bridges. Technology is just a tool. People are the real bridges." "That's a much bigger challenge," Maria said gently. Oliver's fingers moved across the screen with determination. "We need to start now. Tomorrow." 1 year later, the grand ballroom of the Watson estate buzzed with excitement. Clusters of people chatted eagerly: educators, doctors, programmers, parents of neurodivergent children, and journalists from major publications. They had gathered for the official launch of the Bridge Project, an initiative that had grown far beyond anyone's initial expectations. At the center of it all stood Oliver, now 11 years old, looking both nervous and determined in his navy blue suit. Though large gatherings still challenged him, he had insisted on being present for this moment. Beside him stood Maria, no longer dressed in her housekeeper uniform but in an elegant outfit that reflected her new position as co-director of the Bridge Foundation. "Are you ready?" Maria asked softly in Spanish, their original connection language. Oliver nodded, clutching his tablet. Over the past year, his spoken vocabulary had expanded significantly. But for important presentations like this, he still relied primarily on his text-to-speech device to ensure his complex ideas were communicated clearly. Elaine approached them, looking nothing like the harried CEO Maria had met on her first day. Though still impeccably dressed, there was a softness to her now, a presence that came from truly being in the moment rather than mentally juggling a dozen business concerns. "The governor just arrived," Elaine said, "and the education secretary's representative. Are we still on schedule?" Maria checked her watch. "Perfect timing. The demonstration is set up in the East Wing, and the children are ready whenever Oliver is." The children she referred to were the first test group for the Bridge Project, 12 kids of various ages with autism, apraxia, and other communication challenges. For the past 6 months, they had been working with Oliver's program, with remarkable results. Elaine gently touched her son's shoulder, a gesture that once would have overwhelmed him but now brought a small smile to his face. "This is your moment, Oliver. Everything we've built started with you and Maria." Oliver typed quickly on his tablet. "No, it started with listening. You both finally listened." A soft chime indicated it was time to begin. The guests moved toward the makeshift auditorium, where chairs had been arranged facing a stage. As Elaine stepped up to the podium to begin her welcome address, Maria and Oliver waited in the wings. 1 year ago, my understanding of communication, language, and neurodiversity was completely transformed. Elaine began, her voice clear and confident. Like many parents of autistic children, I had spent years focusing on what my son couldn't do instead of discovering the extraordinary ways his mind actually works. From the side of the stage, Oliver listened intently as his mother shared their journey, how a housekeeper had discovered what teams of specialists had missed, how language had built a bridge between different ways of thinking, and how that discovery had led to the development of groundbreaking educational tools. "Today, we're not just launching software," Elaine continued. "We're introducing a new paradigm for understanding neurodivergent minds. The Bridge Project combines technology, specialized training, and a fundamental shift in perspective." She gestured toward the side of the stage. "And now, I'd like to introduce the true visionaries behind this project. My son Oliver and our Director of Language and Cultural Integration, Maria Alvarez." As they walked onto the stage together, the audience applauded. Oliver kept his eyes focused just above the crowd, his hand lightly touching Maria's arm for reassurance. They had practiced this moment many times, but the reality of all those eyes watching still tested his limits. Maria stepped to the microphone first. "Thank you all for coming. Before Oliver presents our work, I want to share something important. I am not a scientist or a doctor. 1 year ago, I was a housekeeper who happened to speak several languages. What helped Oliver wasn't special training or revolutionary techniques. It was simple human connection and respect for his unique way of experiencing the world. She turned to Oliver, who took a deep breath and stepped forward. He positioned his tablet near the microphone and pressed a button. When I was younger, the device spoke in a voice they had customized to sound more like a child's. People thought I didn't understand. They spoke about me as if I wasn't there. They thought I needed fixing. Oliver paused, looked out at the audience briefly, then continued typing. The problem wasn't that I couldn't understand. The problem was that I experienced language differently than most people. Each language has its own color, texture, and pattern in my mind. English, my first language, is actually the hardest for me to speak aloud because its patterns tangle with my thoughts. The audience listened in rapt attention as Oliver explained how his mind processed information through patterns and sensory associations rather than linear sequences. He described how learning multiple languages had given him different pathways to express himself when one became blocked. What looks like a disability from one perspective is actually a different operating system, the tablet continued. The Bridge Project isn't about fixing children like me. It's about finding each child's natural pathways to communication and building upon them. With a nod to the technical team, Oliver triggered a demonstration video on the large screen behind him. The audience watched footage of children using the Bridge software, an adaptive system that began with patterns, sounds, and colors, then gradually mapped those sensory experiences to language concepts based on each child's unique responses. When the video ended, Oliver surprised everyone by setting his tablet down. He gripped the podium, took several steadying breaths, and spoke aloud in carefully measured words. "This is hard for me," he said, his voice quiet but clear. "Speaking in English is like swimming upstream, but important for you to hear my real voice." The room was completely silent, every person leaning forward slightly. The children you will meet today have their own voices too. Some speak through technology, some through movement, some through art. All are valid. The effort visibly exhausted him, and he stepped back, picking up his tablet again. Maria moved closer in silent support as he finished his presentation through text. "Now I'd like to introduce you to my friends who have been part of our pilot program. They will show you what's possible when we build bridges instead of barriers." The side doors opened and 12 children of various ages entered with their parents and teachers. Unlike typical demonstrations where children are asked to perform on command, this presentation was structured differently. The group had created an interactive exhibit where guests could experience the bridge system firsthand, guided by the children who had been using it. As the formal presentation concluded and guests began moving toward the exhibits, Dr. Lin, one of the neuroscientists who had been studying Oliver's language acquisition, approached Elaine. "Your son is remarkable," he said. "We've documented his fluency in 9 languages now, with comprehension patterns that challenge everything we thought we understood about language acquisition. Several universities are interested in collaborative research." Elaine smiled. "Any research involving Oliver will be on his terms. He's not a subject to be studied. He's a partner in the process." "Of course," Dr. Lin agreed. "That's precisely what makes this work so revolutionary. It's not being done to these children, but with them." Across the room, Oliver was showing a 7-year-old girl how to use a feature of the software that translated her movements into musical patterns, which then connected to words. Her mother watched with tears in her eyes as her previously non-communicative daughter created sequences that expressed her thoughts. She's saying she loves butterflies and the color purple, Oliver explained to the mother through his tablet, and that she feels happy when she dances. The woman covered her mouth with her hand. "We never knew. We thought she didn't understand," Oliver typed. "She understands everything. She just needed a different bridge." As the event continued, Maria found a quiet moment to observe from the sidelines. She watched as Oliver moved between languages effortlessly, speaking briefly in Spanish to one family, typing in French to a Canadian education specialist, showing a Chinese-American child how the program worked with Mandarin characters. Elaine joined her, handing her a glass of champagne. "Remember your first day at the house? When I barely looked at you and just barked orders about taking your shoes off?" Maria laughed. "And now look at us. Life takes unexpected turns. I was thinking about something, Elaine said, her voice growing serious. The foundation is expanding internationally next month. We need someone to oversee the cultural adaptation of the program for different regions. Sounds like an important role, Maria nodded. We'd like it to be you, Elaine said. You'd be traveling, working with teams around the world, helping them understand the core philosophy of building bridges across different ways of thinking. Maria blinked in surprise. Me? But I don't have formal training and you have something more valuable. Elaine interrupted gently. You have the ability to see people as they are, not as you expect them to be. That's what started all of this. Before Maria could respond, they were interrupted by a commotion near the main exhibit. A journalist was kneeling at eye level with Oliver, asking him questions while a photographer snapped pictures. So you're the genius boy who speaks 9 languages? The journalist was saying. Can you demonstrate all of them for our viewers? Oliver looked uncomfortable, taking a step back as the man pressed closer with his microphone. Maria and Elaine started moving toward them. But before they could intervene, one of the children from the program, a tall 12-year-old boy who hadn't spoken a word during the 6-month pilot, stepped between Oliver and the journalist. He doesn't. Like that, the boy said haltingly. Please, step back. The journalist looked startled and the boy's mother gasped audibly. It was the first time she had heard her son speak in public. Oliver recovered quickly, giving his new friend a grateful look before typing on his tablet. This is what bridges do. They help us reach each other when we need to. Later that evening, after all the guests had departed and the mansion was quiet again, Maria found Oliver sitting in his favorite window seat, looking out at the garden illuminated by moonlight. You must be exhausted, she said, sitting beside him. He nodded but seemed content, typing, good tired, like after climbing a mountain. You certainly moved mountains today, Maria smiled. How does it feel? He thought for a moment before typing. Remember when I couldn't find words for anything? Now I have words in 9 languages, but some feelings still don't fit in any of them. Try, Maria encouraged. Oliver set down his tablet and looked directly into her eyes, something that had once been impossible for him. In a voice that was becoming stronger with practice, he said one word that needed no translation in any language. Home.